Welcome, Humza Yousaf, Cabinet Secretary for Justice for Scotland and the Scottish Government, to our first ever launch podcast for Scotland against modern slavery. This is a real passion of mine, and I know it is Hamza's as well. The problem of human trafficking and exploitation in Scotland isn't going to go away, but we're doing our best, and that's all we can do as humans to help eradicate this. Now, we've set up Scotland Against Modern Slavery as a vehicle for the business community to understand what the problems are in Scotland, and also how the business community in Scotland can work together to help eradicate this. So, first of all, without much further ado, I'd like to welcome you, Hamza. Thank you so much for joining us today for our first ever podcast.
Listen, real pleasure, Shan. Look, thanks for all the work that you've been doing, particularly in your role as somebody who's involved in business, but also so delighted to be part of this coalition, Scotland Against Modern Slavery. It's not just for government, it's just not for business. We've got to work collectively together. So really pleased and thanks for inviting me on your podcast.
No problem. I'm delighted you're here. Hamza, you've many firsts in your life. The youngest ever minister in the Scottish Government, the youngest ever cabinet minister as well. Many firsts, and I think that's really important in society and business as well, that you've made those milestones. Tell me, you must be so driven. What makes you tick?
First and foremost, that awful finance secretary of ours, Kate Forbes, has stolen my title of being the youngest of all of these things. She came in a couple of years after me, but has swooped in and stolen my title. How dreadful of her for doing so.
Sorry to hear.
I know, but look, it's I've never been driven by I've got to be the first ethnic minority in government or youngest in government or whatever else. What motivates me, I suspect, what motivates you is my service to the public. So although you're in business and I'm in government and I'm managing a portfolio, what drives me is people. And it isn't about the pounds and pennies in my bank account. Of course, that's important. Everybody's got a mortgage. Well, people have got mortgage to pay, rent to pay, families to feed, all that kind of stuff. But what drives me absolutely is my service to the public. And I always think to myself, the day I wake up in the job, and it can be a fairly stressful job in truth at times. When I wake up, if I ever wake up and I'm motivated by anything other than wanting to do the best for the people that I serve, then it's time to get out. So I'm driven by that, and look, I'm really philosophical about it as well, Shan. And politicians are up there 1 minute, electrocycle, we're down there the next. So while I'm on that wave, and while we're on that wave, let's ride it to the best we can, and advocate the principles that I believe in.
Absolutely refreshing to hear. I'm sure many of the listeners and viewers will be delighted to hear that. And to me, Hamza, it makes it so important because you mentioned it's about people, and that is human trafficking, modern slavery. It's about people. There's no way of getting around it, and it's the misery of these people as well, and how it can happen under our noses. And I think that kind of leads me on to talk a little bit about Scotland and the history of Scotland, because there's no getting away from it. Black Lives Matter. It's been very, very apparent in the news over the last few months that Scotland, Glasgow, Edinburgh, our big cities, has made its name through its connections with historic slavery globally through the Commonwealth. And I think through the Americas and there's no getting away from it. You and I are both Glasgow boys. We've grown up going up and down Jamaica Street or past the Gallery of Modern Art, and we know that there's a history behind that now. But for me, personally, I understand the past is the past, and that level of slavery, that historic slavery, is what I think many people in Scotland still think is what slavery actually is. Whereas nowadays, we can have it happening underneath our noses in the businesses, in the car washes, in many businesses, in the supply chains of some of the things that we may buy as well, that it slips in there. And that's really important to get across with Scotland Against Modern Slavery. So, I mean, I know that's something as well that you've spoken about in the past. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I couldn't agree more with what you've just said. It's fascinating. I mean, Glasgow has got, on the one side, a really strong presence and credibility around the anti-racist movement. So you think all we did during the apartheid movement, the first city to grant Nelson Mandela its freedom, Glasgow University being, one that granted James McCune Smith, the first African American outside of America to get a medical degree, Glasgow University. So we've got on one hand, great anti-racist credentials, but you can't ever ignore the other side of the equation, which is that Glasgow was also the second city of the empire. I mean, it's not millions, it is tobacco billions and multi billions that helped to build the entire merchant city, let alone many other parts of Glasgow. And it's a visual reminder every time you and I go down Buchanan Street or Argyle Street or, as you say, Jamaica Street, any of these streets. It's a real visual reminder of us, to us of Glasgow and Scotland's role in slavery in days gone by. So we've got a lot to do actually to one recognise that, and secondly make sure we educate present generations about our role in the slave trade. So that's a very active conversation. But the other part of the equation that you mentioned, I think, is so important. When I talk to people about slavery, modern slavery, human trafficking, most folk automatically think that my next sentence is going to be about what's going on in Commonwealth countries, or what's happening in countries in the African continent. But actually, I'm telling them we are getting referrals, and we'll no doubt come on to talk about this, but hundreds of referrals of people that are possibly being trafficked right under our noses here in Scotland. And it's a mixture of exploitation. We know that it's sexual exploitation, it's labor exploitation, which is the big one.
Mhm.
It's coming from countries all over the world, and it also is including people who live in Scotland, are born, bred, raised, generations of Scots, and they're now being, imprisoned in slavery.
Absolutely, and that's final point you made there is the fastest growing ethnicity of people that are trafficked are actually UK nationals. To me, that's the one that blows me away every time.
Absolutely, absolutely, and this is it, and again, we can talk about this, but you know, it is something quite perverse that there's people that have lived in this country understand what it's like never to have been enslaved in a sense, now being enslaved in such a way, and the stories we hear are truly horrific.
Absolutely. Yep. I've heard some of the stories myself, Hamza, and
Yeah,
it's what drives me actually. Just the stories make you more passionate about what you're doing. I think in Scotland we have numbers that have grown as well. Not I think I know that the numbers have grown. I'm sure, as
yeah.
you said, we're going to talk about this now. Is that we've had the biggest percentage increase, 125% increase in victims rescued and referred to what's called the National Referral Mechanism. So that NRM, and for any of our listeners, I think maybe Hamza would like to explain, or I could explain it. The NRM is when a first responder or that person, the police, whoever it may be, is identified as a victim of modern slavery, they are then referred into what's called the National Referral Mechanism, and that's when they become this statistic. So it's only at that point do they join the NRM, and then the Scottish Government have a whole load in place to protect and help rehabilitate and support that individual as they go through the system, which is really, really important to get across. So the NRM is where these figures come from. We had 512 victims last
Mhm.
year, Hamza, up 125%. And how do I mean, what's your thoughts and what's behind that increase and why it's happening in Scotland much more than years gone by?
So I hope part of the answer is that people have more awareness of what modern slavery and human trafficking and exploitation is. So my hope is because we talk about it more in government, because business talks more about it, because there's more TV programs, radio programs, and actually, unfortunately, because there are examples that have been found and people have been convicted of some of the offences. There's that very famous case, I think it's from 2018, of the four individuals, Robert McPhee and a number of others that were jailed for a total of almost 30 years, actually, for slavery. And that, again, was labour exploitation. That because these are in people's minds, then hopefully part of the hope is that they're now more confident in coming forward and knowing what the NRM is. And you explained it very well in terms of the referral mechanism. But the other side of that is just, again, much like you, I'm just astonished, because these numbers, again, will not be all the numbers of people that are possibly being trafficked. We know there'll be many out there that are not getting the support, not getting the help, don't know who to call. But this number alone, 512, of which we know 318 were referrals in terms of labour exploitation, but 512 in total of people in Scotland, That is just mind blowing and staggering. So the reasons behind that could be many. As I say, I've referenced some of the reasons. It could be awareness, particularly on the back of high court cases, etc. Hopefully through government marketing. It might also, unfortunately, be, and this is relevant to the situation we're in at the moment with the pandemic. It could be because people are feeling more and more vulnerable in terms of their own situations. Maybe they're feeling like they have less money, cash, they've been made redundant from jobs, there's less opportunity out there. Does that make them more vulnerable to exploitation as well? So that's something we've always got to keep an eye on as well.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think there's a Um, there is some evidence to suggest that COVID has had an impact. The
Yeah,
lockdown and post COVID, whenever that may be, we'll see this increase continuing. One of the things that I found is that there's a when we're talking to businesses as well, and say in certain types of environments that businesses look at communities as well. So this is maybe people from other European countries that have come to work and live in Scotland, and you might
yeah,
find in some environments that um, some of the local population that work in those places will say, "Well, that's just the way the Romanians behave or the Bulgarians,
mm,
Polish behave." And I must say that I find that that's not acceptable as we're all Scottish. And myself coming from an Asian background, I know growing up in Glasgow that people say, "Well, that's the way that they behave, and they just leave them to themselves, and that's how they are." And it's not actually true because we all are one in Scotland, and that's frustrating for me. Have you experience of those types of situations yourself, Hamza?
yeah. Look, I think we come across those attitudes really regularly. You know, I'm from the south side of Glasgow, and if I was to go into Govan Hill and I hear some of the things, it's very fascinating. Actually, some of the things I hear things from people who are like me. They have subcontinent ancestry,
Yeah,
and they'll say things about Eastern Europeans that people said about them 30 years ago. So the exact same, misconceptions, lies, slanders
yeah,
that were said against Asian people in the 1960s,
60s, yeah,
70s, 80s, those same people are now saying, unfortunately, about Romanians, Slovakians, Polish people come 2020, and it's really dispiriting and quite upsetting. But you're actually right. What that can do is it can mask, the obvious signs that people need to look out for. There's some really good awareness campaigns that are run by the likes of Police Scotland and the government jointly in relation to spotting the signs of human slavery, of modern slavery,
yeah.
and actually, if you allow your preconceived stereotypes to take over, then actually you might end up not spotting those signs, and that can be very harmful for the people involved.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I'm laughing here when you talk about people of Asian ancestry because I have uh, the family originally from Sri Lanka, and I know that I've heard people from Sri Lankan community talk about those Polish or those Romanians, and you think not that long ago, 20,
Yeah,
30 years ago, people were saying this about you, and then in a city like Glasgow, you go back far enough, and people were saying this about the Irish immigration that was coming into our city. So you're absolutely right. It's interesting you're talking about the red flags, Hamza, because that's something that I talk quite clearly about, I suppose, at a lot of the events that we've held in Scotland against modern slavery, about spotting the signs, and that it's not acceptable to say. It's not in my head anyway. It's not right to say, "Oh well, that's the way they behave." That's how they are, because you'll miss those signs, as you quite rightly said. Some of the red flags that we've we come across in the workplace, or as somebody dropping off a number of people and picking them up, somebody providing them all with lunch,
yeah,
control, financial details, passports, national insurance numbers, one phone number for a group of people that we may be putting out to work. So, these are all the red flags that we look for and try to take people's, unfortunately, their prejudices away and say, well, no, it's not. That's You have to lay it bare, understand? So that's
yeah.
really, really good point made. So tell me about. So there's some people might want to talk about or hear you talk about the human trafficking and exploitation strategy for Scotland, because we have. When I talk to businesses out there, they find it confusing that there's the Modern Slavery Act from the UK government, Human Trafficking and Exploitation Act from the Scottish government, um, and it would be good to get your view on what the differences are and what it means and what the Human Trafficking and Exploitation Act means and the strategy behind it.
Sure, sure. Happy to provide hopefully some clarity on that. So first and foremost, it should be said, for all the differences I often have with the UK government, and they're quite numerous, On this issue, we work really closely together, and I'm really thankful for the good engagement that we have with the UK government on this issue, and so it should be thus, because what we're talking about ultimately is trying to ensure that we help the most vulnerable in our society to escape modern slavery. So it's only right that regardless of what your political colours are, political stripes are, that we work together on this. So there's a good level of working with the UK government and on this issue, probably more so than any other issue in my entire justice portfolio. So that's positive. In terms of our own, what actions we've taken here in Scotland, again, really positively, there's a good consensus in Scotland about tackling this issue. Nobody in Scotland, in terms of political parties, have their blinkers on. They're all really positive about this is an issue, this is a problem, let's tackle it. So and as evidence of that, actually, the Human Trafficking and Exploitation Scotland Act that was passed in 2015 was passed unanimously. There was no party that dissented, and again, it's not always certain that you're going to get that legislation by any stretch of the imagination. So, what did that act do? What does it do? It creates two new offences. I kind of referenced this already, actually, in terms of one of the high profile cases, but it created two new offences: one offence of human trafficking and slavery, and the second offence of servitude and forced or compulsory labour. But what the Act also did was it required Scottish ministers to produce and develop a trafficking and exploitation strategy. So that was in 2015. So we did that, and the exploitation, the strategy, human trafficking exploitation strategy, was created in 2017 or published in 2017, the spring of 2017 as well, and essentially had three areas in it that it focused on. One was how do you identify the victims and make sure that they get the support that they need. How do you identify the perpetrators, which is a really important part of it as well, and we can't forget that. Although the focus is largely on the victims, we've got to make sure we disrupt the perpetrators. And then is the more global question: how do we address the systemic issues around that allow human trafficking to thrive, to grow, and how do we work in that global environment? And there's a lot of good organisations in Scotland doing that. And there's a fourth area as well that is focused on children, which is really, really important. We don't lose sight of either.
Yeah,
All in all, actually, in each of those areas, business is so crucial. And again, I'm sure we'll touch upon it, but in each of those areas, business has got a big role to play in all of that. So a lot of the work from the strategy has been about engaging with the business community. How do we get them to buy in, to understand what's going on? Because most, if not every single business, or at least 99.9% of them, want absolutely nothing to do with modern slavery.
yeah,
What they don't realise, or some of them don't realise, is that actually, although they might be confident in their own processes, what happens down the supply chain is something they've also really got to be conscious of as well.
absolutely. And that's really leads us really on to the business community and their part in all of this and supply chains. I mean, so I would see that my passion behind all of this came from trying to exploit business opportunities and move our business more into the food production sector. And by doing a course that was dedicated to the food production sector, it actually educated me in something I didn't really know about and got me really frustrated and really quite passionate about it. Um, and I felt that then, as a business, we had to do something about it. And that's where this whole Scotland Against Modern Slavery comes from. And I think, as you mentioned there, and looking at the human trafficking exploitation strategy, you're right. Working with business is core to that. And one of the parts of raising awareness in the business community is really important. And that comes under Action Area 3, one of the parts that you spoke about there. So we are hopefully launching the Scottish Government's corporate group to support Action Area 3 to help disseminate information from the government. Also, have an ear with yourself and your cabinet colleagues with regards to the issues that face business with regards to this matter as well. So we've got open dialogue, which to me is brilliant, and that's what I feel is makes me so passionate about Scotland, because we have a country where we can actually have a voice with the government and be close to the government and the matters that are important to us. And so we'd like to work together. So we're launching the corporate group. slightly delayed, obviously, and we'd like to get businesses involved and business leaders involved. As businesses start to come together, hopefully, as we grow and as we start talking to them, and there's a number of whiskey production companies, food production companies, construction companies that I've already spoken to over the last 2 or 3 years that are very keen to become part of all of this. What would you say are the most important things for businesses to be aware of and to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, let me commend you as a driving force behind the group, but also those that you're working with. I think it's so important that business and government are working hand in hand here to tackle this. It's not all the responsibility of government. It's not all the responsibility of business.
Yeah,
We've got to work closely and align together on this. For me, I think the most simple thing I can say to business is this is not about placing any additional or huge additional burdens on you. Yes, there's now an expectation if you're a business of a certain size, turnover over 36 million, that you have that statement there in terms of modern slavery. But what actually we want to do, because as I say, the vast majority of business, if not almost all business, has no truck with modern slavery or human trafficking and exploitation. So what we want to do is work with you to make sure that all your processes, your supply chains, the contracts that you tender, everything that you do as a business, none of that is facilitating human trafficking in any way, shape, or form. And actually, if we work collaboratively together, I've got no doubt that we will create the conditions where it's very, very difficult, if not, I hope, one day impossible for modern slavery to thrive in Scotland. Now, that does require some effort. You talked really well and you articulated really well the signs that people need to spot in terms of potential exploitation. It's really important that businesses um, have risk assessments in place and understand what are the signs as a business they need to look out for. See if you're going out to contract for a job and one of the tenders comes back and the price is too good to be true. I mean,
yeah,
less than half what the price is compared to everybody else. You might just want to question that. Maybe it is good business practice, but you might just want to question that and understand a bit more about why that's the case. Are they using, for example, forced labor? Forced labor. So look, there's lots business can do. It's not about placing extra burdens on business. It's genuinely about working with you to make sure you spot the signs and do everything in your power to make sure that you're helping us to tackle this.
and that really fits in. As I said, from a UK government, Scottish government, everybody's saying the same thing. Nobody is wanting to single out a business or somebody in the business community and scare them, or
Yeah.
it's about working together. And don't be what I would like to say in addition to that is that don't be afraid of um, putting your hand up, saying, "Oh, we don't know what we're doing here. We need some help or support," because there is so much I know available in Scotland, not just through government, through the NGOs. There's businesses, there's charities out there, the GLAA, the Gang Masters Labour Abuse Authority. There's so much out there from all these organisations that can support and help any business, no matter what the size, turnover. If you have any issues and any concerns, that's what we hope to be able to do with Scotland Against Modern Slavery. Come to the holding. We can signpost you, sorry, to the right direction that these people that can support and help, because it can be quite complex as well. But that's great to hear as well. There's a real live government minister saying here, he's not going after you. What he's wanting to do is help and work with the business community. And that to me is so refreshing. So it's not something to be afraid of, it's something to be part of. There's nothing should be holding any business back from joining in and helping and contributing in some shape or form. So that's absolutely brilliant and spot on. Um, I suppose it's been absolutely fantastic. I'm thinking of what's coming as well. Legislation changes are planned. It's coming. There's a consultation and a review of the Modern Slavery Act. The UK Modern Slavery Act was held. What do you think will happen, and how long will it take? We're all caught up in a pandemic just now, and or actually, sorry, we're all caught up in today. Just if this recording goes out later on, we're all caught up today and to find out who wins the US elections. But and can you tell me, what do you think that is going to happen with the legislation, and what will it mean?
I thought you were going to ask me what's going to happen with the US elections. That's anybody's guess, right enough that we'll have the answer by the time this might well go out.
Right.
Um, you're right. I've been in government now for 8 years, and I have faced many challenges over that time, many challenges, but never have I dealt with anything as challenging, as difficult as the current pandemic. It has sucked up every bit of government resource, every bit of government energy, um, and we are understandably so focused on that task, because it is about the very immediate, uh, and it's about people's lives. Again, on the day that we're recording this podcast, the First Minister just, a couple of hours ago, did her daily briefing, and just today, 50 people have died. 50 deaths in 24 hours. So we're getting to a period in winter where it's going to be incredibly challenging, and we will, of course, get through this. But I couldn't tell you when. I don't know when the vaccine is going to be globally available. I know there's some good work being done, but I couldn't tell you when. So government has to be focused on this. So you're absolutely right. The UK government did consult with the Scottish government on changes that they were making in relation to the Act, and they're thinking of making in relation to the Act. Some of those touch upon devolved responsibilities, and we'll be very keen to take some of that forward. I think what might be different is that we're doing some good work on business, and I think there's some really good changes coming in that will, there'll be a reporting period of when businesses need to report in terms of their statement. They'll have standardized information. So that's helpful for us for collection of data. So there's nothing too onerous on business at all. I think what's interesting is what we should do about public authorities and public bodies as well. Many public bodies, public authorities, government included, of course, have far higher budget than many businesses, and therefore, if business is having to do that, then public authorities and public service should have to do the same as well. So that's where some of our thinking is. I couldn't honestly, Shan, tell you with much certainty when some of those changes might well come into place, because at the moment, as I say, everything is on the back burner because of the pandemic. But I can promise you, for this government, and I think I can speak for the entirety of the Parliament in this regard, it still remains a real priority for us.
That's fantastic, and you're right, absolutely right. The legislation, when it comes, it's welcome. It'll have unity across all nations in the UK, and full support as well. It sounds like from the Scottish government. So again, this is music to my ears because it makes that message clear and concise, and it'll get out there. Unfortunately, as you say, time constraints. COVID has created this horrible time in our society, and hopefully, fingers crossed that we'll come through this, and we'll come through stronger as well. But yes, you're absolutely right. So Hamza, you've been fantastic, and delighted that you've opened this first Scotland Against Modern Slavery podcast. You're the first again, so you've another first for you as well. I must say as well, you must stand as a inspiration for many aspiring young politicians in Scotland as well. And also, I know that you're held in high esteem in the Asian community in Scotland because you're the first, and you're leading the way. So tell us before we finish, aspirations for yourself. People is your passion. Where do you want to be? Will you be another first in the future?
Well, listen. Thanks first of all for such a really kind words, and I do appreciate them, and I don't say that flippantly. I mean, I'm afraid to say, often on the receiving end of a fair bit of abuse, racial, Islamophobic, and frankly, just anything. People will just take a pop at you for anything. So it's actually quite nice to get the other side of the coin. That actually, Twitter isn't necessarily the real world, and out there, it's nice to hear people say that they appreciate the job. Even when we get things wrong, and as politicians, you've got to put your hands up and know that you're not going to get everything right 100% of the time. So it's really nice of you and kind of you to say those words. I'll be honest, I don't plot my life out on a kind of giant whiteboard and think about what the next strategic move is going to be. I just get on with the job that I'm given, the task I'm given. It won't be any surprise to any of your listeners, of course, because of the party I belong to, that I believe very passionately in independence.
Yeah.
I really, I think, goodness, if anything, last number of months or even couple of years actually has probably shown that Scotland is drifting in a certain different direction to the rest of the UK. So I won't bang on about it too much, but I'd love to be in the first government of an independent Scotland. So maybe that's another first that I look forward to. But other than that, I don't necessarily plot or plan too much. We've got a hell of a job to do with the pandemic. So even the work we're doing at Independence, which is our real core issue for us in the SNP, that's on pause, and everything is focused on people's health, and that's got to be the immediate focus, the immediate priority.
Absolutely. And you know, you've just related yourself, I'm sure, to many, many people out there listening that it's their day job, and their day job's got a whole lot harder since the start of the pandemic. And sadly, a lot of people have lost their jobs,
Mm.
and that's another issue that we face in our society. But the ones that have continued working have had to work a lot different, much in a much more different way, and a lot harder. So it's refreshing to hear that that through the sad circumstances, it's exact. You're just like everyone else, just like one
Indeed,
of us.
indeed. I'm
Okay.
definitely quite like that. And it's funny because I was just on a call before this one, and it was a video call, and halfway through, it's quite a serious subject we're also touching upon. And of course, halfway through that, my 1.5-year-old, who now has discovered how to open doors, burst into the room shouting, "Daddy, Daddy." And it made me and everybody else in the call laugh
Yeah, yeah.
during the serious subject. And they were saying to me, we didn't know that happened to ministers as well, but I think it's important to remember as politicians, we are just people as well.
Okay, well, delighted to hear, and having an interrupted call by one of your children is a common issue amongst many of us out there, hundreds and thousands of us out there. And I'm delighted to hear it's happened to you. So,
Yeah.
well, Hamza Yousaf, Cabinet Secretary for Justice for the Scottish Government, thank you so much for joining us today and opening
Thank
our
you.
first podcast. I'm delighted for your time. Thank you now.